I'm here with John Guandolo, and John, you have a unique perspective as well from FISA because of a position you used to hold. Will you touch on your experience and what you know about a FISA?
Sure. So I was an FBI agent from 1996 to 2008, and while in the FBI, one of my duties was I served at FBI headquarters for a few months, and one of the things I did quite frequently was serve as an affiant, or somebody who swears to an affidavit for FISA warrants in the FISA court. And so there's just two points I want to make. First, the FISA itself, what is it? So FISA means Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, so it's an act of Congress, it's a law. The judges in the FISA court, and there's no physical building, for instance. There's not a building that says FISA court. These are federal judges on the federal bench, including the appellate court, that have already gone through the confirmation process, and they're chosen by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, approved and overseen by the Supreme Court to do their duties in this realm. So it's constitutional, it's lawful. That's an important part. And the second thing I want to make sure everyone knows is it's needed, and it fulfills a very important role in our national security. So for the people who say that this is simply a rubber stamp, they are incorrect. And let me explain what I mean by that. When an agent, for instance an FBI agent anywhere in the United States, has a case and they want to get a wire electronic intercept of this kind of somebody's communications, or even putting a microphone in their home or office or vehicle, then they go through the FISA court when the need is to keep this entire thing in the secret realm. Counterintelligence and terrorism investigations are an example of that. So what's the actual process? The process is an agent in the field is already in a discussion with the supervisor at FBI headquarters, and the entire FBI, all the field offices are broken down into areas, and a supervisor at headquarters oversees that area. So when any FISA warrants come out of that area, that supervisor is the affiant. And so when I was at headquarters, I was on many occasions, and I'll just say I got a certificate when I left doing temporary duty, and they called me FISA man because I did so many of them.
Uh-oh.
And I say that because the individual on the other end, the case agent, and I as a supervisor go back and forth, because I'm putting my reputation and my profession on the line when I swear the truth to that affidavit to get the FISA warrant. So we go back and forth until I'm comfortable that every statement in that affidavit, and by the way, FISA warrants, it's not unusual to have one that's over 100 pages. So you can imagine the time it takes to go through these things. Some are shorter. I've seen some that are very short, especially when you need expeditious warrants signed. But the facts still have to be there to meet the legal requirement of probable cause. And then once I'm satisfied that all the facts are in fact facts and they're supported, then the affidavit comes with a cover sheet. And so I now have to go to the DOJ, and I work with an attorney, and then it gets signed off at senior levels of DOJ, and the FBI director himself or his designated rep, like a deputy director, but not somebody much lower than that, has to sign off on it. And I can tell you there were times when I did this, when I literally on like a Saturday or Sunday go with the Department of Justice attorney to the FBI director's home. He sits there, and this was Director Mueller, would sit there and read through the entire thing and ask questions. How do we know this? Who is this? What's this? And then when it's all done, he would sign the cover letter. That packet we would then go take to the judge. Now we'd sit, myself and the DOJ attorney, in front of the judge, and then the judge would read it, and sometimes the judge would say, come back in a couple hours while I filter through this. And the judge would filter through it, and we'd either sit there and wait or go out and come back. Then the judge would ask questions and say, hey, what about this? What about that? How do you know this? Who's this source? How long has he been a source? Normally those questions, from my experience, came more from the FBI director and DOJ, but sometimes judges would ask that because what we're asking for is usually pretty important. And then when the judge signs off on it, then copies get made. We get the copies we need to give to our electronic and technical people, and then the coverage actually begins. That's how it works. So to say it's a rubber stamp is nonsense. Now, one more thing. I just had a guy say this the other day, asked me a question on a radio show, and he said, well, yeah, but the vast majority, of FISA warrants get signed. Well, of course they do. If you just listen to what I just said about the process, by the time it gets to the judge, that affidavit has been gone through several layers of very of significant scrutiny by myself as the guy signing it, with the agent out in the field, the Department of Justice attorney, the Department of Justice authority who signs off on it, the FBI director, the deputy director, and then the judge. So by the time it gets to the judge, he or she knows the kind of scrutiny it's gone through. So to this current case with the FBI, what I just described to you is the normal process to get a FISA warrant. That means what happened in this case with the Page FISA warrant that was signed by the judge. It means that the DOJ and the FBI knowingly provided an affidavit that had information in it that was not true, number one, and they omitted deliberately, we now know, information that would have left the source, Mr. Steele, it would have demonstrated he was not a reliable source, and that's being generous. So there was an intentionality here to bring information before a federal judge to get a warrant, which was untrue, which is perjury, intentional, and I would argue prior to the election, that's intentional tampering with a federal election. There are other charges as well, but I want to be very clear. When these actions are taken in pursuit of a larger movement against the government like this, it's sedition. And when the people involved are people who have sworn oaths and have duties to the U.S. government, an argument can be made, and I would make that argument, that it's treason. And I believe the people involved should be punished to the fullest extent of the law, under the laws of treason.
It'll be most interesting to see what comes out in the next few days. Do you believe, with the way it came out, that it will continue to live and not get pushed aside somehow?
Well, I have faith at this point in the American people. I have no faith in the Congress. I have a little bit of faith, very little in the DOJ, to do anything about this, and certainly no faith in the FBI. The senior leadership on many issues have demonstrated that they are incapable of performing their duties, especially in the counterterrorism realm, and I would argue in the counterintelligence realm. So I think the American people are going to keep this on the front burner. There seems to be a relationship between the President of the United States and the American people.
Yes.
The President seems to understand this. I hope that he understands the implications of this. This is, and based on the information that there are people, up to a dozen FBI agents in the FBI conspiring against the President of the United States. If that's true, they should be charged with treason and executed for it.
So this would be the beginning, potentially, of draining the swamp?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I get why we use that, but I put that in the same category as fake news.
Okay.
It's not fake news. It's intentional, hostile propaganda campaign by media corporations and media stations with reporters and anchor people in order to progress a Marxist movement here in the United States. That's sedition too. I think calling it fake news gives it, basically gives a pass to people that are conspiring to overthrow the U.S. government. And so I think when we talk about draining the swamp, I like the imagery of that, but in reality what we're talking about is bringing people to justice
Yes.
for committing sedition and treason.
Yes. Do you believe if this one goes forward and is prosecuted, that there'll be additional things like a domino effect, potentially?
Well, I have not seen any sort of courage in Congress as a whole obviously there have been several members of Congress that have demonstrated courage throughout this thing, but I mean, Congress as a whole, Republicans and Democrats, I haven't seen that. So I don't have any faith that anything's going to happen there. Not that much faith in DOJ so far. Appointments from President Obama in the Department of Defense, in the Department of Justice and Homeland Security still remain, and they are creating massive havoc, much more than the public understands, but I think things are starting to come out that reveal. And I go back to what I've said previously on your show, but also in other media interviews. You know, understanding the threat helped get one guy punted prior to the president's election, but a guy who a lot of the damage was done, one of the two people vetting for national security positions who was sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood. So like even on the quote unquote Republican conservative side, and this guy was a self-proclaimed conservative Christian, the enemy is embedded. And I think both from the Marxist counter-state or the Marxist movement, the Islamic counter-state or the Marxist or Islamic movement, there is a lot of work to be done, and it's not being done nearly as quickly as it should be. And then finally, I would say, you know, the president has brought in general officers from the military to serve in his administration, which is demonstrated to be catastrophic. I think the only one that's demonstrated any competence at any level is General Kelly. The rest of them have proven to be problematic in a lot of different ways. So I think his reliance, these are the same generals that for 16 years, 17 years have failed to understand the threat we lost in Afghanistan and Iraq. It seems like nobody batted an eye. Our military courageously crushed the enemy on the battlefield and we lost the wars. And yet we have generals getting retired with full benefits who should be in jail. So I think there's a lot more to do. Many more people need to be dealt with through legally in our system.
Well, I look forward to seeing you again next month, and I'm sure there'll be more to this story that we can talk about then. John, thank you for your time today. I always appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kat, for all you do.